My name is Randy Sabado. I came to this campus in 1971, and I was 19 years old, first time away from home. And we started PASA, being a group of people in 1972. So this is what, the 51st year? So when I left campus in 75, I didn't know what was going to happen to PASA. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I got contacted by the historian at that point, and I was amazed that PASA was still in existence. But I retired. I've been retired for about 8 years. But before I retired, I worked for government for almost 40 years. When I left campus here, I became a social worker. I worked for Asian Mental Health in Oakland. I worked with the Filipino component. So Asian Mental Health is made up of Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and Filipino. And we worked in the the immigrant community, and primarily in Oakland. So I worked primarily with Filipino teenagers and their families in Oakland. One of my first cases was a Filipina who was 12 years old, who was pregnant, and she was like, I don't know, 8 months pregnant, so it was too late for her to abort it. So, if you can imagine coming out of college and having to try to help not only this 12-year-old, but her parents and her boyfriend at the time. So that was my first case. So I was a social worker for 5 years. I worked for Alameda County Social Services for like 2 years. So I worked with families and with children, and this was in Oakland. So there were some heavy times working in Oakland. I kind of got burned out after I worked in social work for 4 years because I saw all these people that were going through the welfare system, and there was no way for them to get out. They were trapped in this system, and I would see young girls and young women have babies just so that they could get more money, and that's no reason to get pregnant. So I got burned out from social work. I had a hard time separating people's problems and issues from when I got home. There was no there. It would just go through my mind, and I was trying to figure out how do I help people. And there's so much stuff going on that's systemic that you can't solve as a person. Poverty, lack of education, discrimination, all of that stuff. And to try to tackle it, just even in groups is really difficult. So I got burned out. So after that, I decided to go into public service. I worked in the real estate field for, 35 years. I retired 7 years ago, and I've been enjoying retirement. So that's me. What I'm here today to talk to you about are the 5 pillars and how it shaped me and in and out of PASA. So the first one I'm going to talk about, before I get that, I want to show you, I don't know how many of you have seen this. Some of you may know that my wife, Gerry, I met her on campus. I actually proposed to her on campus. She passed away about 1.5 years ago. She did a lot of stuff for the aquarium in Monterey. She was in a program there called Turning the Tide at Storied Monterey Bay. So they asked me about 2 weeks ago if I wouldn't mind if they named this African penguin after Gerry. So this African penguin is named after Gerry. And then if you go down a little bit there, so if you can click on this. This is a YouTube. This is Gerry.
Aww.
So they just released her into the colony. I think they don't even know if it's a male or female. But I call her she, but she. So the aquarium is going to set up a time where, you know, my family and our relatives are going to be able to go and actually see Gerry, you know, before they open it up to the rest of the people in the aquarium. So that's going to be cool. So what's neat about this is, you know, Gerry lived in Monterey. She grew up in Monterey. That's where the aquarium is. And she loved to go to the aquarium. She loved to, you know, look at the animals and watch the kids and their excitement with all the, you know, animals. So it's ironic and also kind of fitting that, you know, Gerry is now at the aquarium. She gets to, you know, visit with, you know, all the people that are in the aquarium. So I just wanted to share that with you. Yeah, if you get a chance to go, I asked the aquarium, you know, how am I going to pick Gerry out? Because, you know, they all look the same. I think there's going to be a tag on her, but I don't know if anybody can see it from a distance. So anyway, so wanted to talk to you about the pillars. The first one is academics. So I graduated from this campus with a degree in history. When I told my father I was going to major in history, he said, you know, what the heck are you going to do with history? So how many of you are like liberal arts majors? Yeah, I'm sure you're having the same questions. When I graduated, I wondered what liberal arts, you know, English, history, you know, those subjects. I wasn't very good in math or science. So I don't know why history intrigued me, but you know the question was, well, so what am I gonna do after I graduate from college? And I really didn't know. I mean, history is a good background for other subjects. I was thinking about going to law school, but the thing is that no matter what you graduate in, you know the skills, the habits that you grow here on campus is going to carry you through. I mean, in terms of just, you know, doing research, being organized, being able to keep timelines, having good communication skills, both writing and orally. Those things can be transferred to any particular job. You know, when I went out into the working world, you know, a lot of folks, or a lot of employers were just impressed with the fact that you've got a college degree. If you've got a college degree, that shows employers that you went through 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever it took, and you stuck it out, and you know you could do stuff on your own. I mean, after I graduated college, I thought, well, wait a minute, what? I know now where to get. I know where to look for things. I can go into the library. This is before the internet, so I could go into the library. I could do research on my own. You know, what do I need a teacher for? But you know, you learn all these skills, and there's things that you can apply to anything. You don't have to be a science major. You don't have to be a math major. You don't have to go into medicine. You don't have to be a teacher. I mean, if that's what you want to do and that interests you, great. But you don't necessarily have to. The second thing is friendship. When I came to this campus in 1971, I didn't know anybody. I walked around campus and I would see another Filipino or another Asian, and we just kind of walked by each other. You know, there was no Filipino club. There was an Asian club. So we decided to go ahead and form a Filipino club. And you know, when we started, there was a group of maybe 20 of us at the most. It was a core of maybe 6 or 12. But we became really good friends. Such good friends that I've probably told the story a million times, that we started pairing up. And out of the core 12 or so, about 5 couples actually paired up. And 3 of those couples married each other. So, you know, I was married to Gerry for over 42 years. I met my best man when I was at PASA. he was married to his wife for over 40 years. Another friend of mine met his wife here, and they've been married for also over 40 years. But it's not just, you know, the romantic connections, but it's the friendships that you make. That's the important thing. And it's not just like at PASA. After I graduated and went on to work, you know, you spend a lot of time with people at work, more time than with your family. When I said I retired 8 years ago, and yet I still go to lunches and I celebrate birthdays with people that I worked with for over 20 years. Even though I don't see them on a daily basis, we still have lunch. You know, it's nice for me because then I get to hear, you know, the stories that are going on at work. But friendship, I mean, it's what sustains you a lot of times. When you've got problems or issues and you can't talk to your parents or your family or you know, it's your friends that you go to. And it's the friends that you make sometimes here and a lot of times at work. Okay, next one is community. You know, Filipinos are known for being, you know, family oriented. I remember when I was growing up, everybody Filipino was family to me. I grew up in a small town in Salinas, and whenever we had a party, my dad would invite anybody and everybody. And whenever I would bring my friends over, I would introduce everybody as my aunts and my uncles and my cousins, and they would say to me, you know, how many relatives do you have? And, you know, Filipinos, you know, everybody's related. You know, your uncle, your auntie, your cousin, your grandma, your, you know, whatever. But to me, that's the thing that I miss most when I left home and I came to this campus was community, family. Like I said, when I walked around campus, I would see Filipinos just kind of walk by each other. And yet, you know, we have this connection. We have history, we have culture. And that's one of the reasons why we started PASA, was to see if we could get together as a group and celebrate our culture and history. One of the things that my dad told me when I left home, you know, I'm 19 years old when I left home. First time I'd ever left home. And he said to me, you know, if you're ever in trouble, find another Filipino, and they'll help you. You know, and I thought, that's not gonna happen. Well, the first day I was on campus, I locked my keys in my car, and I didn't know how the heck I was gonna get them out. So I ran into this Filipino policeman, security guard, and he actually helped me get into my car. So, you know, I told him the story that, you know, I just came on campus, I don't know anybody. So he wrote his name and address on a piece of paper, and he said, you know, here's my address. Come over for dinner. So that was my first experience on campus. And it kind of, you know, made my dad's words come true. I don't know if that was a sign, but I mean, I didn't know this guy. He didn't know me. He just knew I was Filipino and I was in trouble. So, you know, he invited me over to his place. I had dinner with him. I got to meet his family. And being, you know, first time away from home, I knew that if I ever was in trouble, I could go to this guy. And, you know, it made that first year, you know, a lot easier for me to adjust. So that to me is community. And even after graduating from college, I've been involved in a couple of organizations. granted, they're mostly Chinese, but a lot of these social organizations, they try to help students by offering scholarships and by teaching culture to their kids and their grandkids. Asians, not just Filipinos, but Asians are, for the most part, family oriented, and they want to pass down their traditions, their culture, their history to their kids. So, you'll see this. Well, you probably already know that. Okay. Last thing. Well, one of the last things is culture. To me, your culture is where you come from. It's your roots. It's like, your life is this tree, and the roots that help you grow, that spread out your wings, your branches, is your culture. And you can either, water it, grow it, spread it out, and make the tree stronger. Or, I've seen some people just kind of back away from their culture and their history. And it kind of deteriorates your foundation. It's like the foundation of who you are. And when I first came to campus, I was struggling to find my culture and my history. Because I'm Filipino American. I don't speak Tagalog. I was born here, but yet my parents instilled in me, the culture and history of the Philippines. But I wanted to know more about it. So when I came to this campus, there was no Filipino studies, there was no Tagalog, and I craved for it. When you're in college, at least to me, it was the opportunity to kind of get out of my comfort zone and try to learn a little bit more about myself. So PASA, went to the administration and said, we want a Tagalog class. And the administration said, fine, you have to find a teacher and you have to find 12 or 15 students to take the class. So everybody in PASA, no matter if you were fluent in Tagalog, we all took the class. We tried to advocate for a Filipino history class, but then the administration said to us, well, there's an Asian studies class. And we said, well, heck, you're gonna cover Filipino history in 2 weeks? That doesn't do it any justice. But, we didn't win that fight. I thought, well, at least we got a Tagalog class, and we'll do that fight the next year. Never got around to it. What was ironic to me is, 50 years later, now ethnic studies is being required. This is something that we fought for 50 years ago. The whole reason why, one of the reasons why PASA began was in 1968, there was a ethnic studies strike at SF State. And a lot of the Filipino students here went to SF State and participated in the strike. They came back and said, we got to do the same thing here on campus. So I don't know if you know the history of PASA, but there was another organization before PASA, and it was called FASA with an F. So they started in 1968, the same time after the ethnic studies strike. They only lasted a year, and then by the time I got here in '71, they lasted 2 years. By the time I got here in '71, it had already gone away. So that's why when I left, I was wondering, what was going to happen to PASA. But I think the people that followed the group in 1971 and '72 built this organization with, all the programs that you have now, the whole mentorship thing, and reaching out to people and developing the leadership. That's why I think PASA is still here after 50 some odd years. So you guys have the recipe for continuing this organization. I just hope you continue to do that. And then the last thing is leadership. leadership to me is someone who inspires passion and motivation. In the well, when I was here on campus, I was pretty shy. I would never get up in front of a bunch of people and talk. But when we first started PASA, there was about a group of 6 or 7 of us sitting around the table, and we were looking at each other like, well, somebody's got to lead this thing. Somebody has to take the bull by the horns and do something, and nobody would do something. And I was sitting there and I was thinking, well, hell, this is too important to not have somebody at least, help lead this thing. So I said, sure, I'll do this. And that was totally out of character for me. I never spoke up in class. And what motivated me, I think, was it was just too important. And we wanted to build this thing and to not see it go forward. It just wasn't going to happen. When I left this campus and I worked in the outside, I ran into so many different type of people who have different leadership skills. You have some leaders who will just kind of dictate to you and say, this is what we're going to do, no questions asked, just do what I tell you. And those folks, to me anyway, they get stuff done short term, but long term, it doesn't last. At the next opportunity, someone's going to sabotage you or do something to you. To me, a leader is someone who instills motivation, who gets input from everyone, doesn't take credit for everything. Whatever we do together as a group. Nobody outshines everybody. We do this as a group. When I was the manager of several departments, and I saw, the same thing in terms of different leadership skills. You would see these guys who would just dictate to people, you'll do this, you do this, you do this. And they're people, their departments, nobody liked them. They got disintegrated. But I saw this kind of like collaborative leadership where you include everybody. Everybody has a stake. Everybody shares in, the responsibilities and the goals. And that's what built up a lot of these departments that I worked in. And it was the leaders who saw that helped it. So I think I've covered everything. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Questions, comments, anything?
Oh,
Yeah, so how was the ethnic studies strike like in SF?
it was wild. It was wild. This is 1968 was the same time as Vietnam War was going on. So you have all these, student movements going throughout the country, anti-war movements, and all the students on campus were organizing. I don't know if some of you may know the history of student organizing, but it actually started in Berkeley about 1965, the free speech movement. So you'd have all these students on campus just kind of go on strike and protest and wanted to have say in the classes that they were, being taught. They wanted to say in how, the government was student government was being run. But, the ethnic, studies strike at San Francisco State. I mean, I wasn't there, but from what I heard, it got violent. I mean, just like all the other protests. What was strange about it was that San Francisco State appointed an Asian, S.I. Hayakawa, to be the president of SF State. And I think a lot of the students thought, oh wow, we've got an Asian president. He's gonna see how important this whole ethnic studies is. The thing is, S.I. Hayakawa was more conservative, and he fought ethnic studies. I mean, eventually it happened, but it wasn't without a whole lot of of organizing and just reaching out to the different ethnic communities. The other thing, like I said, the other thing that was going on at that time was the Vietnam War. And then later in the 70s, Marcos declared martial law. So I was on this campus, during the whole turmoil, just before in the late 60s and then in the early 70s. So when I was going here, a lot of the activities, student, movements were happening at San Francisco State and at Berkeley. We tried to do some stuff here, but in 1971, this was a commuter college. There were no dorms. People would come from off campus, go to class, and then go home. So it was hard for us to organize people. We would try to organize people, but a lot of times they would just kind of go home. I don't know with the dorms here and the people here more on campus whether or not you have those same issues, but yeah, that was when I came to this campus. It was an interesting time. Any other questions? No.
How was like the Filipino population like back then versus like how it is now?
How was it? You're talking about the student population?
Yeah.
It was, back then, there was no separate category for Filipinos. There was Asian, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, but there was no separate category for Filipinos. There was other. We were considered other. And for us to organize back in the 70s was difficult because we couldn't identify who was Filipino. We went up to the administration and said to them, look, we're trying to start a student group here, but this is a commuter school. We can't, how do we contact the other Filipinos? And they wouldn't, I don't know why we asked this, because I knew they were gonna share it with us, but we wanted to find out how many Filipinos were here. But they couldn't tell us because there was no category for us. We were other. Most of us, when they put other, I just crossed it out and just put Filipino on there. I'm not other, but the hell's other. So, that was, the way that we tried to organize back then was, we would grab anybody who looked Filipino and just say, hey, come here. We're gonna have a party, or we're gonna do this. Are you interested in this organization? And back then we didn't care if you were not Filipino. Gerry, my wife's Chinese. We just, as long as you were interested in helping us to try to organize students around ethnic studies and around being active, having a say in student government, having a say in how much they charge you in terms of your tuition. We were really idealistic. We thought we could impact these things. I think for the most part, administration would listen to us and say, yeah, we'll listen to you, but we're gonna do what the heck we want to do. It's probably the same today. So, but the general community, there was a lot of Filipinos in Hayward. The schools that we would go to was Mount Eden, and then Union City was Logan, because we knew that there were a lot of Filipinos there. So we would go to those schools and do some tutoring, or we would go to those schools and try to recruit for them to come to this campus and say, hey, look, come to Cal State. There's a Filipino group here. We'll help you with your studies. We'll help you with trying to adjust to college life. And so I think we were pretty successful. And I think you guys are doing kind of the same thing. You try to look forward, where your next group of people are going to come from. Anything else? Yeah.
How was your guys' first PCI?
PASA says that the first PCN was, what, 72? But I don't think, what we had was, there was an event called the Spectrum of the Arts, and it's different ethnic groups had like different booths throughout campus. So the Filipino group, we actually had built a bamboo hut. We got palm fronds from, I don't know, we found some palm trees, and we cut them and we put them on this hut, and we sold food. We had one room like this that had like an exhibit of Filipino, outfits and different artifacts. And then we had some high school students, it may have been from Mount Eden, I can't remember now, do Tinikling, do an exhibit. And that was the first cultural organization I remember. It wasn't a separate Filipino thing. It was something that went on throughout the entire campus. I remember that happening in 74, 75. But I don't know where, someone said PCN started sooner than that. But, I mean, even regardless of when it started, I mean, you guys, or this organization has been here, I think, one of the longest of any group on campus. And to start from a group of, 12, 20 to what, 100? That to me is impressive. Any other questions?
On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad was the school administration back then?
Probably about a 10.
So maybe
Yeah, I think they just tried to placate us. I mean, if you can imagine them saying to us, yeah, you can have a Tagalog class, but you gotta go find an instructor, and you gotta find, 20 students to take this class, otherwise we're not gonna approve it. And we're students. I mean, how do you find, a Filipino instructor? And how do you find, that's why, even if you were fluent in Tagalog, we convinced you to take the class, just so that we could continue the class. And they did. But the administration didn't help us. Like I said, I tried to get from them a list of the Filipino students here so that we could try to contact them. No. We ended up writing, I ended up writing some editorials in the Pioneer. The first one I wrote was back in 1972, just saying, back then the Pioneer was coming out daily. I don't know what it is now, maybe it's weekly. But I would write editorials saying, hey, PASA exists. We're gonna have a meeting on such and such a day. Be there. And that's how we, got people we recruited. The administration didn't help us. We had 2 other Filipino instructors here. One was in business, and the other one, I don't know if you've ever heard of NVM Gonzalez. I think he may have passed away a few years ago, but he's a noted author. He wrote several books, and he was one of our advisors, our mentors. But are there any Filipino instructors here? Yes.
Joseph Sacramento.
Professor Sacramento and
Oh yeah, just so 2.
do we know any other ones? We have other staff and faculty, but not professors.
Hmm. Yeah, it's too bad. I know they must be out there. So who's your advisor now then?
And
Oh,
right now.
Dr. Sacramento now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was always the argument the administration had with us is find us a qualified teacher. So it's easy for them to just say, we'll just placate these guys. They'll never find a qualified teacher. But we surprised them and we found one. Any other comments? Oh, back.
Oh, just one question. For the professor who taught the Filipino like language class, do you happen to remember their name?
If I think about it, I will probably remember.
You don't remember? Okay.
No, I mean, we're talking 50 years ago.
It was for the script. But yeah, you know, the reason asking is my aunt was telling me the way that she got introduced to PASA is that someone told her to go to the language room, which the professor was the taught Tagalog. So
She didn't, her name was Angie Tomanek.
okay.
She ran, I don't know, just at that point, it was like a language lab where you would have like tapes and stuff. This is back in the old days, guys. Tapes where you would listen to stuff. So it was Angie Tomanek. But she didn't teach the Tagalog class unless she did later on after I left.
Oh,
Tomanek, yeah, I think she was married to a guy who was Greek.
oh,
So she used to live in the Hayward Hills, and she was also kind of like our advisor, mentor. We would go up to her place, and you know, she would cook lunch and dinner for us, and we would talk about stuff.
that's
So.
really community.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other? Sure.
What year did you visit James Logan, and how did they contact you first, or did you contact them?
We contacted them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we had to. I mean, there's no way the administration was going to let a bunch of college students or anybody come on campus. So yeah, we contacted them first. And if I remember, I mean, Logan has a huge Filipino population, probably one of the biggest, high schools, that have Filipinos in the area. But I remember contacting them probably in 70, 73, 74.
So it was like right after you folded.
Yeah. Yeah, right after we started PASA, we all began to think of, how do we continue this? How do we recruit more Filipino students to come on campus? And the logical thing is, you go to the high schools, and which high schools are the ones that have the most Filipino students? At that time, it was Mount Eden and Logan, but the students were very receptive. I mean, a lot of them thought, Cal State Hayward. I want to go to Berkeley.
Yeah, because we're the commuters.
Yeah.
We're underrated. That's what
Very.
Yeah. Well, originally I came here thinking I was going to go to Berkeley, but once I got here, it was like, what do I want to go to Berkeley for? The competition and the cost. Basically, for liberal arts, this was great.
They're all the same degree.
Any other comments, questions? Sure.
After joining class or like establishing it and learning more about your culture, I want to know who's your favorite which historical figure from Filipino history has like completely changed your view?
I don't know if I would consider him have you guys read America's in the Heart? Carlos Balusan. He wrote this novel called America is in the Heart. And it's basically about the Filipino-American experience here in this country. I think he was a farm worker, but kind of like the same experience my dad went through. My dad came here in the late 1930s. Originally, he came here to go to school, but then he ended up working in the canneries in Alaska. And then when World War II broke out in 1941, he wanted to enlist in the army, but because he was Filipino, they wouldn't let him join the regular US Army. So back then, Filipinos created their own regiment. It's called the Filipino 1st and 2nd Regiment. And so my dad enlisted probably in 1942, and he served, through World War II. 2 years ago, well, about a year ago, Congress finally passed an act that gave those veterans a Congressional Gold Medal. So that was pretty cool. My mom was able to, get that medal from my dad. Even though my dad wasn't, like a historical figure, to me, he was my hero. He had a 6th grade education, and he came to this country, at 20 years old. He married my mom after the war. She was 16 years old. So she came across, the Pacific to here when she was 16 years old, didn't know anybody, had 7 children. My dad started off as a migrant farm worker. He would follow the crops. He worked in Delano in the grapes. I worked in the fields in Salinas when I was, believe this or not, back then, you could get a work permit at 12 years old. So I was working in the fields at 12 years old. I was picking tomatoes. And I would work in the fields in the summertime and on the weekends. And one year, 1965, I met Cesar Chavez. So I was working in the fields in Salinas. And he was organizing the United Farm Workers. So I remember, I was working in the fields, and I see this group of people walking towards us with, their flags. And they were, trying to get us to come out of the fields. So they were organizing United Farm Workers. So a lot of us left the fields and were just listening to him trying to get us to organize. And I went to my dad and I said, hey, this Mexican guy came to the fields and he was trying to organize us. And my dad said, well, Filipinos started the first, some of the first farm worker labor unions in the state. They organized, the grape start, so that to me was impressive. I mean, if you've never worked in the fields before, it's back-breaking work. They treat you like an animal. I mean, I work for 12 hours a day sometimes back in the fields. And back in the day, we used to have these hoes, they called them short hoes. So they're only about like this. And you would have to bend over. And this was before they had machines, so they would plant like lettuce, a whole string of lettuce. And your job was to thin it out. So the only way to thin it out was with a hoe, just kind of going like this, kind of separating everything. So if you can imagine bending down like that for 12 hours a day, and some of these guys, these were the monos. So these guys were already 60s, 60 years old. They had no family. And they're out in the field just kind of, doing this work. And I remember them telling me, look, you don't want to end up this way. Go to college. And that's what my father taught me too. He said, you want to wear a suit and a tie. You want to be a boss. You don't want to be out there having somebody tell you what to do 12 hours a day, having to go to the bathroom in this porta potty, that gets dragged out there. And you work 7 days a week for minimum wage. I would go sometimes to the labor camps where a lot of the Filipinos lived and the Mexicans lived. And I mean, these guys were satisfied, but it was a rough life. I mean, I don't know how they did it, and these guys did it without family. So I actually lived the Filipino-American experience, and it's I like to tell you guys this story because I try to tell my kids the same thing too, is, education is the key. That's your way of, succeeding, however you determine success to be. But you don't want to end up, like a lot of these guys that ended up in the fields. The other thing is, though, that a lot of them were happy. I mean, as hard as the work was, they would make their money, they would send it home. They would go to parties. That was the only thing that they knew. They didn't know that, they were missing, the family life and all that other stuff. So it's a sad story. There was there was a race riot in Watsonville in the late 30s, and a couple of Filipinos got hung, and one actually got shot. So Watsonville is not very far away from here, and we're talking about 1930s. That's not very far away. So the Filipino-American history, in California is not a pretty picture. And a lot of this stuff I didn't know about. When I was growing up, we had American history, but they didn't talk about any of this stuff. They didn't teach us anything, about your own history, about your own roots. That's why when we got to campus, we wanted to know a little bit more about us. To me, college is a time for you, to get out of your comfort zone, to spread your wings, to try to find out a little bit more about you, your history. Where do you come from? What did your ancestors go through? Because that's essentially, that's your foundation. That's your roots, and it's good to know it. It makes you appreciate, your parents, your grandparents, and everybody else that came here. Sorry if I'm preaching to you.
I knew that. Wait, so when they were in their 60s, by the time you met them, what year is that? In the 60s?
In the 60s, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. We're actually going to cover curriculum on the monoms. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
so just having that's a little taste of what we're going to be learning in a couple weeks. So thank you so much, Randy, for that part. Oh man.
Well, if you get a chance, read Carlos Bolasan's America is in the Heart. So,
So after completing a college degree, would some people still be farmers?
Actually everybody's different. I think most of the people that got their college degrees didn't go back to the fields. But there are some people that, even though they got their college degrees, and this happens to not just Filipinos, to everybody, they have a hard time in the real world. And, people get into, alcohol, drugs, whatever. And, it's hard for them to get back into the world and find a job. So a few of them did, end up going back, working in the fields. But I'll tell you, if you work in the fields, you'll stay in college because it is backbreaking work. I remember making less than $1 an hour. So for one whole day, assuming you work 8 hours, $8. What can you buy for it? $8. Of course, this is 50 years ago, but still. Anything else?
Sorry.
That's all right.
But what are those years when PASA, do you have any dates of when PASA fought for that language class and for the ethnic studies?
Well, if we started in 72, it would have been either 72 or 73. Because it was that first or second year that I was involved. I'll try to remember the name of the instructor. I'll see if my best man, I haven't spoken to in years because he's in the Philippines. I don't know if he's still around, but he was part of that class. So let me see if I can ask him.
Good reason to keep in touch.
How's it
Yeah.
going, man?
Thanks a lot. By the way, we were with that one teacher.
Oh.
Yeah. Anything
I think
else?
we could look it up. We're doing the archive. You mentioned how education is important as well. I want to know your opinion on the issue of work, because I know a lot of, from my experience, I know a lot of Filipinos growing up in the Philippines. A lot of them go abroad and they like leave their family, or not leave their family, but get like separated from their family because they want to go back to their country. Do you think that's a good thing?
These are Filipinos from the Philippines coming, going
Yeah,
out?
like they're going abroad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a way, it's sad that they have to leave the country to do that. But if that's your way, the only way of getting out and finding a job. But I don't know how they keep in touch with their family. You know, you hear there's horror stories of, especially like Filipino nurses or domestic workers that,
When they go to
they go to different countries and they get taken advantage of and killed or whatever, and they don't go back to their country. I mean, it's like they don't have there's no voice for them. They're just, like slaves. And it's not just Filipinos, it's, all the other third world folks. The immigration of Filipinos to this country, there's, for the longest time, they restricted the amount of Filipinos who could come to the United States. Then I think it was like in the 1960s, they allowed, the more trained like nurses and doctors and teachers to come. But that depleted all the folks in the Philippines. So, one of my regrets is I've never been to the Philippines.
Oh.
Filters. I have a house. I have a parents from
I guess it's time to visit your best man.
Let's go.
My dad has a call plan. Hurry up. Leave it in my feet.
Not too quick.
Anything else? Oh, one of the things that I got involved in was when I was here, Marcos declared martial law. And this was like 1972 when we first started PASA. So, a lot of folks wanted us to join all these anti-Marcos rallies and marches. And I tried to get some of the people to join, but a lot of the folks were more interested in, what's happening here. I think they were sympathetic to what was happening in the Philippines, but they were more concerned about, getting an education and making a living here and trying to send money back. I don't know if that's the same sentiment here. I mean, the Philippines for, many years has always had, political issues. There's always going to be poverty. There's always going to be corruption. So it was hard for me to get people to be interested in what was going on in the Philippines because this was also happening during Vietnam. And one of the reasons why I decided to stay in college was I didn't want to go to Vietnam. I was at a draftable age. And at that point, they were picking lottery numbers. So if your number was a certain number, no matter if you were in college, you didn't get a student deferment, you would be sent to Vietnam. And they were getting close enough to my number. And I was thinking at that point of going to Canada.
Yeah.
That was the only way to get out of their draft. But luckily, they never drafted me. But I had high school friends, it was back in the late 60s, who actually enlisted in the military and never came back. So when we would have like our high school reunions, there'd be a list of names of the guys that, guys back then who served in Vietnam, never made it back. And these guys were like, 18, 19 years old, didn't get a chance to live, and got killed for what? So it was a tough time to be an 18, 19-year-old. There were all these things that were going on. And I know you guys are probably living through some of this. I mean, you're not draftable yet. I mean, there's no draft, but it's crazy out there. Anything else? I didn't want to drag this too long, but
You're just so rich in history that you know so much. Thank you for asking all these questions. Like, we're really invested in what you have to say about Filipino culture.
It's from my own experience, because what I really wanted to learn when I was here on this campus. I wanted a Filipino history, I wanted a development class, because this is where I thought I would get it, and I didn't get it. So I had to do it on my own. I had to research on my own and ask my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles. This is something that my late wife also was interested in. She would always give speeches to kids and tell them to interview your parents, your grandparents. Ask them the story, because once they're gone, it's gone. And how do you carry on your history and your traditions if you don't know it? So find out, write it down, commit it to memory, and that way you can pass that on to your kids. Otherwise, our history, our culture, it's going to be gone. That's why it's important to do like PCN, to showcase our history, our dances, what makes us unique. Filipinos are a very happy, go-lucky, family-oriented. I mean, who doesn't love, singing, dancing, food? This is something that we need to share with everybody. And, PCN is the perfect time to do it. I'm glad that it's continuing.
Thank you so much, Randy.